What if everything you thought you knew about family was a lie? What if the people you raised turned their backs on you in your darkest hour? This is the story of how a grieving widow discovered that her husband's final gift wasn't money. It was justice. My husband always said the quietest rooms hold the loudest truths. In the silence of the church, surrounded by the scent of lilies and old varnish, the truth was deafening. My children, my beautiful, cruel children, were glad their father was gone. I sat in the front pew, the polished oak cold against my back, and listened to them behind me. They weren't whispering. They wanted me to hear. Finally, my daughter, Isabel, murmured, "It's over. We can actually start living now." A low chuckle came from my son, Julian. He certainly took his time about it. "Did you see the car I was telling you about? The dealership is holding it for me." Their voices were like stones skipping across the surface of my grief, each one a cold, hard impact. I didn't turn around. If I saw their faces, the carefully arranged masks of sorrow they wore for the public, I knew something inside me would shatter for good. They were my flesh and blood, the two souls Frederick and I had brought into this world, and in that moment they were complete strangers. I squeezed my eyes shut, and instead of darkness, I saw my husband Frederick's face from his last days. The weariness in his eyes, but the strength still in his hand as he squeezed mine. "Trust me, Vivian," he had whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Everything is going to be all right." But nothing felt all right. The service was a blur of sympathetic glances and hollow condolences. The words slid off me meaningless. I felt like a ghost at my own husband's funeral. The only thing that felt real was the weight of my children's impatience. They weren't mourning a father. They were waiting for a payout. Afterward, the family attorney, Mr. Powell, a man who had known Frederick for 50 years, led us into a small, airless room beside the sanctuary. Isabel and Julian were already there. Their grief miraculously vanished, replaced by a vulture's bright-eyed greed. They sat poised on their chairs, not looking at me, but at the stack of papers in Mr. Powell's hands. Mr. Powell cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the small space. His voice was formal, but I could hear the undercurrent of sorrow in it. He was losing a friend. I was losing a husband. My children were gaining a fortune. "I will now read the last will and testament of Frederick Barrington," he began. He detailed a few small bequests to charities and old friends, his voice droning on. I watched my children. Julian was tapping his foot, a frantic rhythm of impatience. Isabel was examining her nails, feigning boredom. Then came the part they were waiting for. "To my beloved children, Isabel and Julian Barrington, I leave the entirety of my liquid assets, my stock portfolio, and my business holdings, valued at the sum of $12 million, to be divided equally between them." Isabel gasped, a sharp, delighted sound she tried to smother with her hand. Julian exhaled a triumphant laugh, leaning back in his chair as if he'd just won a race. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. $12 million. The number seemed obscene. Mr. Powell paused, adjusting his glasses. He looked directly at me, and for a fleeting second, his expression was one of profound pity. "And to my wife, my dearest Vivian, my companion and confidant of 42 years, without whom none of this would have been possible, I leave this letter." He slid a single, thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table, stopped directly in front of me. My children stared, stunned into silence for a moment. And then the laughter started. It wasn't a chuckle this time. It was a full-throated, ugly roar. "A letter!" Isabel shrieked, her voice dripping with venomous glee. "After 42 years of marriage, that's all you get. A piece of paper. Looks like Dad thought you'd had enough of his money while he was alive," Julian added, his smirk a cruel slash across his face. "I guess you'll have to learn to live on memories, Mom, while we handle the important things." Their laughter filled the room, bouncing off the wood-paneled walls, sharp and merciless. It was the sound of my life ending. Or so I thought. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the envelope. Frederick's handwriting was on the front, my name written in his steady, deliberate script. He had known. Somehow, in his final days, he had known this exact moment would happen. He had prepared for it. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a tiny flicker of warmth in the frozen landscape of my heart. They saw a letter. They saw an insult, a final dismissal. But I saw a message. My husband was a meticulous man. He never did anything without a purpose. He had left them money, but he had left me a mystery. I slowly picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than paper. Felt like a promise. I slipped it into my purse without a word, stood up, and walked out of the room, leaving them to their laughter and their millions. They thought they had won. They thought the story was over. But as my fingers traced the seal on that envelope, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the story was just beginning. They inherited money. I inherited the truth. And I was starting to suspect the truth was worth far more. The children left the church in a whirlwind of excitement. They were too busy making phone calls, to banks, to car dealerships, to friends who would surely be impressed by their sudden massive wealth, to spare another glance for their grieving mother. I drove home alone, the house feeling less like a home and more like a tomb. Every room echoed with Frederick's absence. The armchair where he read the paper, the scent of his aftershave in the bathroom, the indentation on his side of the bed. The silence was a physical presence, a heavy blanket threatening to suffocate me. I clutched my purse, the letter inside a secret comfort. I waited until the sun had set and the house was draped in shadow before I allowed myself to open it. The world was quiet. The children were gone, celebrating their victory. This moment was mine and Frederick's alone. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, raised 2 children, and mapped out our lives. A single lamp cast a warm, golden circle on the worn wood. My hands, which had been so steady in that lawyer's office, were now trembling. With a deep breath, I slit the envelope open. Inside wasn't a long, sentimental farewell. It was a single, folded page of thick, expensive paper, covered in Frederick's meticulous, familiar script. "My love," it began. "If you are reading this, then you have just endured the worst of it. You have heard our children's laughter. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I had to put you through that. I did not intend for it to be a punishment for you, but a final test for them. A test I knew with a heavy heart they would fail. I needed to see their true hearts revealed, not to me but to the world, and most importantly to you before I revealed the truth." I pressed the page to my lips, a sob catching in my throat. The words blurred as tears I had refused to shed all day finally fell. He had known. He had anticipated their cruelty down to the last mocking laugh. He had seen the people they had become, even when I had tried to make excuses for them, even when I had blinded myself to the truth. The letter continued. "They think they have won. They hold $12 million, a fortune by any measure. But what they hold is a shadow, Vivian. It is a carefully constructed illusion. The real substance, the true legacy of everything we built together for 42 years. I have left to you." My heart hammered against my ribs. What was he talking about? An illusion. You will find in this letter a small brass key. It is unassuming. Looks like nothing. But it is the most important thing I have ever given you. It belongs to a safe deposit box at the Sterling National Bank on Ashland Avenue. Box number 713. Everything of real value, everything I could not entrust to their greed and carelessness, rests inside that box. You and you alone are meant to open it. Do not let anyone know about this letter. Do not let them know about the key. Let them enjoy their shadow fortune. Let them believe they have everything. Trust yourself, my love, as I have always trusted you. It was signed, "With love that outlasts everything, Frederick." As I unfolded the last part of the page, A small metallic object fell into my palm with a faint clink. It was a tiny old-fashioned brass key. The number 713 was faintly etched along its stem. It was so small, so simple. It looked like it could open a child's diary. Yet, Frederick's words echoed in my head. The most important thing I have ever given you. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the key in my hand. Questions swirled in my mind. What could possibly be in that box? More money? Documents? Secrets? My pulse quickened with a mixture of fear and a thrilling, unfamiliar anticipation. I thought of Isabel's sneer. I thought of Julian's triumphant laugh, as if I were a piece of old furniture being discarded from his new life. For years, I had put up with their disregard. The small slights, the dismissive words, the important decisions made without consulting me. I had always excused it. I told myself they were busy, stressed, that they didn't mean it. But today, their laughter had stripped away all the excuses. I saw their true selves. And my husband, my quiet, observant Frederick, had seen it all along. This wasn't just a key to a safe deposit box. This was a key to a second chance. It was a lifeline thrown to me from beyond the grave. My children had their millions. But I had a secret, had a mission. I carefully folded the letter and tucked it, along with the key, deep into the zippered pocket of my purse. I then took the purse to my bedroom and hid it in the back of my closet, tucked away inside an old shoebox filled with faded photographs. No one would look there. That night sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. But beneath the fear, something else was growing. A flicker of resolve. My children thought I was a foolish old woman, left with nothing but a sentimental letter. They had dismissed me. They had laughed at me. They had already forgotten me. But they were wrong. Tomorrow I would go to the bank. Tomorrow I would find out what my husband had truly left me. And tomorrow, the sound of my children's laughter might finally start to fade. The morning air was crisp and cool, the kind that felt like a fresh start. But as I drove to the Sterling National Bank on Ashland Avenue, my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The little brass key was in my pocket, its edges pressing into my palm, a constant sharp reminder of what was at stake. Was I being foolish? Was this some final, sentimental gesture from Frederick, a box of old love letters and photographs? Or was it everything he promised? The bank was an old, imposing brick building, with tall glass doors that seemed to reflect a more anxious, uncertain version of me. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside. The cool, quiet air of the lobby did little to calm my nerves. A young teller with kind eyes listened patiently as I explained, in a voice much shakier than I wanted, that I needed to access a safe deposit box. She checked the number on my key, 713, and her polite smile didn't change. She led me past a heavy, circular vault door that looked like something out of a movie, and into a small, private viewing room. It was furnished with just a simple table and 2 chairs. "I'll be right back," she said softly before disappearing into the vault. The silence in that room was absolute. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. I thought of Frederick's last words to me. Trust me. This was it. This was the moment of truth. My entire future felt balanced on the contents of a box I had never seen. The teller returned carrying a long, narrow metal box. It was surprisingly heavy. She placed it on the table with a solid thud, used her own key in one lock, and then gestured for me to use mine in the other. The click of the lock turning sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She gave me a slight nod and left, closing the door behind her, leaving me alone with my husband's final secret. My fingers trembled as they hovered over the lid. I took one last, deep breath and lifted it. There was no cash, no glittering jewelry, no gold bars. My heart sank for a split second, a wave of disappointment washing over me. But then I saw what was inside. It was filled with neat, meticulously organized folders bound with twine, and a thick, leather-bound journal. My pulse, which had started to slow, began to race again. Frederick was a man of paper, of details, of records. This was his world. On top of the stack of files lay another sealed, cream-colored envelope. In his familiar handwriting it read, "For Vivian's eyes only." With shaking hands I tore it open. "My dearest," the letter inside began. "If you have found this, then you have taken the first step. I hope it was not too difficult. What you see in this box is the truth of our life's work. These are the records of my private real estate holdings, my hidden investment accounts, and the shares in several silent partnerships. These assets were never part of the public will. They are held in a series of discreetly managed trusts, known only to me and now to you and Mr. Powell. Their total value is considerably greater than the $12 million given to the children. Much, much greater." I had to read that line 3 times. Much greater. I pressed a hand to my mouth, a gasp escaping. My children had strutted out of that while reading like kings who had just conquered a nation. But they hadn't been given the kingdom. They had been handed a few outlying provinces. Here, in this simple metal box, lay the true empire Frederick had built. The journal drew my attention next. It was heavy in my hands. I opened it carefully. The pages were filled with his script, entries from the past 2 years of his life, when his illness had begun to take hold. He wrote with a raw, painful honesty I had never seen from him before. He wrote of his profound disappointment in Isabel and Julian. He detailed their greed, their casual cruelty, their complete disregard for anyone but themselves. One entry, from about 6 months before he passed, stood out. "Isabel visited today," he wrote. "She did not ask about my health. She asked which of my watches she would inherit. Julian called later. He wanted to know if I had updated my will to account for the new wing he's building on his house. They are no longer my children. They are scavengers waiting for me to fall. They circle and circle, their eyes not on me, but on what I will leave behind." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I read. I felt a strange, heartbreaking mix of emotions. Grief for the pain my husband had carried alone. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the only one who had seen what they'd become. And something else, something sharper, something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. He had left me more than just money. He had left me his story, his reasons, his justification. The final entry was short, written in a shakier hand. "This is why I have chosen this path. It is not to punish them, not truly. It is to reveal them. I have given them enough money to expose their true character. But I have given you, my Vivian, the power. The power to protect our legacy. The power to decide what comes next." I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. He hadn't just left me a fortune. He had left me a responsibility. He had armed me. I gathered the files and the journal, sliding them carefully back into the box. As I lifted it, its weight felt different now. It wasn't just the weight of paper. It was the weight of 42 years of love, of sacrifice, and of a truth so powerful it had to be hidden away in the dark. My children believed they had everything. They had no idea that their father had left them a consolation prize, and that I was now the keeper of his real kingdom. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. Leaving the bank that day, I felt like a different woman than the one who had entered. The world seemed sharper, clearer. But with this new power came a new fear. What would happen when my children found out? When I returned from the bank, the house no longer felt like a tomb. Felt like a fortress. I was its keeper, the guardian of a secret that pulsed with a life of its own. I hid the metal box and its contents deep within a forgotten trunk in my closet, buried beneath old blankets and winter coats. It felt safe, but a new kind of fear had taken root in me, a fear of my own children. That evening, the front door slammed open without a knock. Julian barged in, tossing his keys onto the counter with a clatter that made me jump. He was radiating an aggressive, manic energy. Isabel trailed behind him, a smirk plastered on her face, her phone already out as if to document their triumphant return. They were drunk on their newfound wealth, and it had made them loud and careless. "Mom!" Isabel called out, sweeping into the living room where I was quietly reading. Her smile was too wide, too bright. You should have seen the dealership today. I got the convertible. The red one. Julian got that monster of a truck he wanted. Dad really knew how to take care of us, didn't he? Her words were meant to be daggers, tiny little cuts to remind me of what I didn't get. I forced a polite, neutral smile. I'm glad you're happy, dear. Happy? Julian echoed, striding in. He held up his phone to show me a picture of himself leaning against a ridiculously large, chrome-laden truck. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. You know, you should really think about selling this old place, Mom. Downsize. Move somewhere smaller, a nice little condo. You don't need all this space just rattling around by yourself. I felt the sting beneath his casual tone. Smaller meant forgotten. Smaller meant tucked away, out of sight and out of mind, while they lived their big, expansive lives. I folded my hands in my lap, my knuckles white, willing my voice to remain steady. This is my home, Julian. Your father and I built it. I'm not going anywhere. Isabel tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. The bright, fake smile faded, replaced by a shrewd, calculating look. You know, she said slowly, you seem different. I expected you to be. Well, more broken up, crying in your tea. But you're not. Did Dad leave you something else in that letter? A little secret stash he forgot to mention. The question hung in the air like poison. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But I kept my expression a perfect mask of calm, even as a cold sweat trickled down my back. I had to play this perfectly. He left me 42 years of memories, Isabel, I said, my voice soft but firm. That's more than enough for me. She smirked, but her eyes remained sharp, suspicious. Right. Memories. The word sounded like an insult on her lips. They didn't stay long after that. The air was too thick with unspoken questions. Later that evening, I was carrying dishes into the kitchen when I heard it. The faint, unmistakable creak of the floorboards in my bedroom upstairs. My blood ran cold. I knew Isabel and Julian had left. Or so I thought. I set the dishes down without a sound and quietly climbed the staircase, my heart pounding in my ears. The sight that met me made me freeze in the doorway. Isabel was crouched beside my dresser, her back to me, her hands deep inside my top drawer, rifling through my scarves and personal belongings. She was searching. What are you doing? My voice came out sharper than I intended, like the crack of a whip. She jumped, spinning around, her face a mask of guilt. I was just looking for a photo album, she stammered, her cheeks burning a bright, telltale red. You know, one of the old ones of Dad. This is my private room, Isabel, I said, a cold fury rising in me, eclipsing my fear. You will not come in here and search through my things ever again. Do you understand me? Her eyes, for a moment, flickered with something ugly. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was resentment. Pure, unadulterated hatred. She thought I was hiding something from her, and the thought of it was driving her mad. She brushed past me without another word, her shoulder knocking into mine, and stormed down the stairs and out the front door. That night, as the house finally settled into a real silence, I sat awake in bed, clutching Frederick's journal to my chest. The game had changed. They no longer saw me as a grieving, irrelevant widow. They saw me as a puzzle they needed to solve, a lock they needed to pick. They sensed that there was more to the story, something they couldn't name, and it was gnawing at them. They were right to be suspicious. They were right to be afraid. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the quiet, accommodating mother who smoothed everything over. I wasn't going to bend. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I had no choice but to stand my ground. They had underestimated me, and that was going to be their first and most expensive mistake. It was Isabel's idea to host a family dinner. The invitation felt less like an olive branch and more like a summons. We should honor Dad's memory, she'd said on the phone, her voice dripping with a false sincerity that made my skin crawl. Besides, we have so much to celebrate. We're something nice, Mom. You'll want to see how well we're doing. I knew exactly what this was. It wasn't a memorial. It was a display of power. A way to rub their wealth in my face and probe for the weakness they were so sure was there. I arrived at her house, a sprawling new mansion she'd bought the week after the will reading, with a heavy heart. The place smelled of fresh paint and arrogance. The dining room glittered with expensive, untouched furniture. Julian was already there, lounging at the head of the table like a king on a throne, swirling a glass of red wine. The conversation, as I predicted, was a parade of their recent purchases. 2 cars weren't enough. Julian boasted about putting a down payment on a boat. Dad's money should be enjoyed, not locked away in some dusty old bank, he declared, looking pointedly at me. Isabel laughed, her diamond earrings catching the light. I'm looking at a vacation home in Florida. You should come visit sometime, Mom. Though I'm not sure you'd enjoy the upkeep. It's a lot of responsibility for one person. Their words were a constant barrage of subtle insults, each one designed to make me feel small, old, and irrelevant. I forced myself to eat, the expensive food tasting like ash in my mouth. My grandson, Theodore, Isabel's teenage son, sat beside me. He was quiet, his eyes fixed on his plate, his shoulders hunched. He hadn't said a word all night. He looked miserable. Then Julian leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "So, Mom," he said, his voice casual but edged with steel. "We were talking. Did Dad really only leave you that letter? Nothing else at all?" The table fell silent. Isabel's gaze sharpened, waiting. This was it. The real reason for the dinner. It was an interrogation disguised as a meal. I set my fork down carefully. For years, I would have lowered my eyes, avoided the conflict. But Frederick's words from his journal burned in my mind. Give yourself the power. Decide what comes next. I lifted my chin and looked them both in the eye. Yes. He left me a letter. And it was worth more than any car or boat or vacation house you could ever buy. Isabel's lips curled into a smirk. Oh, really? And what did this precious, priceless letter say? That, I replied, my voice calm and steady, is between your father and me. Julian's jaw tightened. He slammed his wine glass down on the table so hard the stem cracked, red wine sloshing onto the white tablecloth. Don't play games with us, Mom. If Dad left you something, we have a right to know. We're his children, too. I looked at him, at his face contorted with greed. I looked at Isabel, her expression cold and calculating. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small under their glare. Felt resolute. You may be his children, I said quietly. But you were never his legacy. The air in the room shifted, growing heavy and thick with tension. Dinner ended soon after. I drove home under a moonless sky, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, cold certainty. They would come for me. Their greed was a hunger that would never be satisfied. Later that night, there was a soft, hesitant knock on my door. It was nothing like the entitled pounding of my children. When I opened it, my grandson Theodore stood there, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie, his face pale. "Grandma," he whispered, his eyes wide with worry. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he sank onto the couch. "They're fighting again," he said, his voice cracking. "Mom and Dad. It's all they ever talk about now. Money. And you. They think you're hiding something from them. They were yelling about it the whole way home." He looked up at me, his expression a painful mix of fear and hope. "Are you?" he asked. The question pierced me. It wasn't laced with the greed of his parents. It was a plea for truth in a house built on lies. He deserved the truth. I reached for Frederick's journal, which I had started keeping close. I opened it to a page I had marked. "They must learn that love is the only wealth that endures," Frederick had written. "If they cannot, then they will lose everything. But if even one soul in this family remains uncorrupted, then our legacy is safe." Theodore read the words in silence, his lips moving slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He meant me, didn't he? I swallowed the lump in my throat. He meant anyone who still understood what matters, I said softly. I believe that's you, Theodore. A tear slid down his cheek. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. They've been searching your room when you go out. Mom told Dad that if they can find proof you have more money, they'll take you to court and say you're not fit to handle it. I know, I whispered back. Then you need help, he said, his voice suddenly fierce. You can't fight them alone. I studied his face, so young, yet already bearing the scars of being raised by wolves. He wasn't wrong. Alone I was vulnerable. But with him I wasn't just defending a fortune. I was protecting the future. I closed the journal and rested my hand over his. Then we'll fight them together. His fingers tightened around mine, a firm, steady grip. And in that moment, I felt a strength I hadn't known in weeks. The game my children thought they were winning had just changed forever. 'Cause now I had an ally. Working with Theodore was like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a sealed room. We operated in secret, usually late at night after his parents were asleep or out spending their rapidly dwindling inheritance. We spread the documents from the safe deposit box across my dining room table, the faint smell of old paper filling the air. He was a quick study, his young mind sharp and focused. I explained the basics of the trusts, the deeds, the investment accounts. But more than that, I watched the way he listened, the way the disgust for his parents' actions hardened his resolve. Why did Grandpa hide all this so well? He asked one night, tracing the line of a document where his father's name had been clearly crossed out and replaced with mine. Because he knew what your parents would become, I said, my voice catching. He saw the greed in them long before I was willing to admit it. He wanted me to have the choice, Theodore. The choice to protect what we built, and to protect the family's future. Which, as it turns out, is you. He looked down, his jaw tight. They don't care about family. They only care about money. He said it not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness that was far too old for his years. I knew we couldn't leave the real documents in the house anymore. Isabel's secret searches were becoming more brazen, so we devised a plan. Decoy. I found an old, empty binder and filled it with expired insurance policies, old tax returns from a decade ago, and some meaningless, out-of-date legal papers. I even typed up a fake ledger, showing a small, secret savings account with about $50,000 in it. Enough to look like a secret, but not enough to be the grand prize they were hunting for. I placed this binder, along with an old, empty journal, in the trunk in my closet, right where they would be looking. The real documents, the ones that mattered, I took back to the bank and placed them in a new, smaller safe deposit box under a different name, a name only Theodore and I knew. I should have expected their next move, but the sheer violation of it still hollowed me out. I came home one afternoon from the grocery store to find my front door slightly ajar. A cold dread washed over me. I stepped inside, calling out, "Hello." The silence that answered was heavier, more menacing than usual. Upstairs, my bedroom had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, their contents spilled onto the floor. My jewelry box was overturned, necklaces tangled like silver snakes. The closet door hung open. The old trunk had been dragged out, its lock broken, splintered wood marking their crude, impatient work. They had been here. My children. They had broken into my home. I sank to my knees, my grocery bags forgotten in the hallway. I rifled through the mess they'd made, my hands shaking. And then I saw it. The decoy binder was gone. The fake journal was gone. For a moment, a wild, ragged laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound of both horror and triumph. They thought they had found it. They thought they had won. They had the proof they needed, the secret I was hiding. The $50,000 savings account. It would be enough to confirm their suspicions, to fuel their rage, and to make them careless. That night, after cleaning up the wreckage of their invasion, I drove to Mr. Powell's office. He had agreed to see me after hours. His lined face hardened as I told him about the break-in and the stolen decoy documents. "It's worse than I feared, Vivian," he murmured. his hands steepled on his heavy oak desk. But your husband. Frederick prepared for this exact scenario. There is something you haven't seen yet. A final safeguard. From a locked drawer in his desk, he pulled another sealed, cream-colored envelope. Frederick's handwriting scrolled across the front. For my wife, Vivian, if the children turn against her. My breath caught in my throat. Another letter. Another layer to my husband's intricate plan. My hand shook as I reached for it. Open it, Mr. Powell said quietly. It may be the key to ending this once and for all. The envelope trembled in my hands, as though it held not paper, but the weight of my entire future. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. My love, it began. If you are reading this, then my greatest fears have come to pass. The children have declared war on you. I'm sorry. I tried to change their hearts, but some things cannot be fixed. However, I could ensure that they reap precisely what they sow. Their inheritance was never a gift, Vivian. It was a trap. Trap. My heart pounded. Attached to their $12 million are a series of significant debts, hidden tax liabilities, and business loan agreements I personally guaranteed. As long as they were content with their share, these obligations would remain dormant, paid off by a separate, hidden trust. But I have given specific instructions, legally binding clauses in their inheritance documents, that the moment they make a legal move to take what is yours, the moment they challenge your competency or claim further assets, those debts become theirs and theirs alone. The protective trust dissolves. Should they push you into court, they will not be fighting for more money. They will be fighting to keep from losing everything. When the dust settles, they will be left with nothing but ruin. I looked up at Mr. Powell, my eyes wide with disbelief. He simply slid another thick folder across the desk. These are the documents, Vivian. The loan agreements, the tax filings. Frederick wove a financial web so complex it's taken me weeks to fully unravel. If the children drop this now, they walk away as millionaires. But if they sue you, he tapped the folder, they inherit ruin. I stared at the papers. Part of me recoiled at the sheer, cold-blooded brilliance of it. To destroy my own children. But then I heard their voices from Theodore's recording, dripping with contempt as they plotted to have me declared incompetent, to lock me away. They had chosen this path. This was a war they had started. Frederick had simply handed me the means to finish it. I lifted my eyes to Mr. Powell. If it comes to that, I said, my voice no longer trembling, will you stand with me? His expression softened into a sad, determined smile. I made your husband a promise, Vivian. And now I make it to you. Every step of the way. I walked out of his office into the cool night air. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer just defending myself. They thought they had stolen my secret. They thought they were in control. They had no idea they were holding a map that led directly off a cliff. And I was the one who was about to let them take that final step. For the next few weeks, I played the part of the woman they wanted me to be. I let the garden grow a little wild. I answered the phone with a voice that was deliberately a little more tired, a little more frail. I moved carefully, every step calculated. I let my children believe I was drifting, a ship without a rudder, lost in a fog of grief and confusion. They visited often, their check-ins not born of love, but of surveillance. They were predators circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. So I decided to give them what they were looking for. I decided to give them a taste of hope. It happened one afternoon when Isabel dropped by unannounced. Her heels clicked across the kitchen tile like gunshots. She sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, pretending to be bored while her eyes darted around the room, searching for clues. You know, I found another one of your father's old boxes in the attic, I said casually, stirring sugar into my tea. Full of papers. I haven't had the strength to go through it all yet. It's just so overwhelming. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, which had been dull with boredom, sharpened with a raw, primal hunger. She quickly masked it with a saccharine smile. A box. What kind of box, Mother? You should let me help you with that. You shouldn't be climbing around in a dusty attic. Oh, just an old banker's box he must have tucked away, I replied, feigning indifference. Probably nothing but old receipts. You know how he was. He never threw anything away. I let the silence stretch, then changed the subject to the weather. But I saw it. I saw the way her fingers tightened on her phone, the way her gaze flicked towards the hallway that led to the attic stairs. The bait was set. She would tell Julian. That evening my son arrived. His tone was overly gentle. His words rehearsed and dripping with false concern. Mom, Theodore told me Isabel was here. She said you found some old paperwork of Dad's. You really should let us handle that. We don't want you getting overwhelmed with anything complicated. I smiled faintly, a mask of weary gratitude. Of course, dear. That's very thoughtful of you. If it turns out to be anything important, you'll be the first to know. They left soon after, whispering together on the porch, their silhouettes sharp against the porch light. They thought they were so clever. They thought they were closing in on the final prize. They had the proof from my bedroom, and now they had a new target, a box in the attic. They believed they were driving the narrative, that their pressure was working, making me confused and ready to capitulate. They had no idea they were a cast of actors in a play Frederick had written years ago. Later I sat with Theodore in the quiet of the living room. He had listened to my story, his face grave. You really told them about a box in the attic? He asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Yes, I said, smoothing the cover of Frederick's journal on my lap. And now they'll be obsessed with it. They'll probably try to break in again to get it. But the real box, the one that truly matters, they'll never find. Because it doesn't exist. His brow furrowed. So you just made it up? I made it up, I confirmed. To keep them focused, to make them even more certain that I'm hiding things. To make them angry and reckless. Their greed is a fire, Theodore. All I'm doing is adding fuel. He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He was quiet for a long moment. Grandma, he said finally, his voice low. When the time comes, will you really destroy them? The question hung heavy between us. I thought of my children as infants, their tiny hands wrapped around my finger. I thought of scraped knees and birthday parties and the sound of their laughter when it was still pure and innocent. And then I thought of their sneers, their threats, their cold-blooded plan to lock me away and steal my home. They destroyed themselves, Theodore, I said at last, my voice firm. Long ago. I am only going to hold up a mirror and make them look at what they've become. The final piece of the plan fell into place when Theodore came to me late one night. His face pale, his hoodie damp from the rain. He didn't even sit down before he pulled out his phone. They're planning it, Grandma, he said, his voice urgent. I heard them in the kitchen after dinner. They were talking to their lawyer on speakerphone. They think you're hiding millions. They're saying you're mentally unfit, that you're losing your mind. They're filing the papers tomorrow. He hesitated, then pressed play on the recording he had made. Their voices filled the quiet room, dripping with contempt. She doesn't know what she's doing, Isabel's voice rang out. The judge will see she's incompetent in 5 minutes. She told me she found another box of papers and then couldn't even remember where she put it. Julian's laugh followed, a low, ugly sound. Perfect. We'll get control of everything she's hiding. Trust me, by the time we're finished, she'll be sitting in a nice, safe nursing home, and we'll be sitting on her real fortune. Theodore stopped the recording. His hands were shaking. They're serious, Grandma. They're really going to do it. I reached across the table and took his hand. My fingers were cold, but my grip was steady as a rock. I know they are, I said, looking him directly in the eye. In fact, I'm counting on it. They thought they were setting a trap for me. They had no idea they had spent the last several weeks carefully, meticulously, building their own cage. And tomorrow they were going to walk right into it and hand me the key. The courthouse smelled of old wood, dust, and cheap coffee. Its tall ceilings seemed to amplify every nervous cough, every shuffle of paper, turning them into echoes of judgment. I sat at the defendant's table beside Mr. Powell, my hands folded calmly in my lap. My suit was simple, my hair was neat. I looked every bit the part of the respectable, grieving widow. Across the aisle, Isabel and Julian sat with their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man with a smile that never reached his eyes. My children looked triumphant. They whispered to each other, occasionally glancing over at me with smug, pitying smiles. They didn't see their mother. They saw a problem that was about to be solved, an obstacle about to be removed. They hadn't even looked me in the eye when we entered the room. As far as they were concerned, I was already gone. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Cromwell with sharp, intelligent eyes, called the room to order. My children's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth and rehearsed, dripping with false sympathy. "Your Honor," he began, "my clients, Isabel and Julian Barrington, are here today with heavy hearts. They are here because their mother, Vivian Barrington, a woman in declining mental and physical health, has been concealing significant assets left by her late husband, Frederick Barrington. We believe she is no longer capable of managing her own affairs, and for her own safety and well-being, we request that legal guardianship and control of the estate be transferred to her children." Isabel and Julian nodded solemnly, their faces perfect masks of filial concern. Isabel even dabbed at a dry eye with a handkerchief. It was a masterful performance. Mr. Powell remained seated, calm and still, waiting for the performance to end. When it was our turn, he rose slowly, his age giving him an air of quiet authority. His voice was measured, respectful but firm. "Your Honor," he said, "my client, Mrs. Barrington, may be a widow, but she is neither incompetent nor deceitful. What we are witnessing here today is not a question of her capacity. It is a textbook case of predatory greed." A murmur rippled through the small courtroom. Julian stiffened, his jaw clenching. Isabel's mask of sorrow flickered. Mr. Powell placed a thick, bound folder on the judge's bench. Before his passing, Frederick Barrington, a meticulous and far-sighted man, prepared for this exact contingency. These records will show that the $12 million inheritance granted to his children was not without its own unique conditions. He let the words hang in the air. The judge opened the folder, her brow furrowing as she began to read. "Mr. Barrington loved his children," Mr. Powell continued, "but he was not blind to their character. Their inheritance was designed as a test of their contentment, their gratitude. Attached to their fortune are a series of significant, hidden liabilities, business debts and tax obligations their father had absorbed. As long as they accepted what was given to them, a separate trust was in place to service those debts indefinitely. They would have remained multimillionaires for the rest of their lives." He paused, letting the judge continue to read. I could see the color draining from my children's faces. Their lawyer was frantically shuffling through his own papers, a look of dawning horror on his face. "However," Mr. Powell said, his voice dropping slightly, "Mr. Barrington included several legally binding clauses that are triggered by one specific event, a hostile legal action against his wife concerning his estate. By filing this petition today, by bringing their mother to court to claim what is not theirs, they have officially triggered those clauses. The protective trust that was paying those debts was legally dissolved the moment this hearing was called to order. As of this morning, the entirety of those liabilities, totaling just over $14 million, has been transferred directly to them." The courtroom was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My son, Julian, half rose from his seat, his face ashen. "That's impossible. He's lying," he barked. "Order!" Judge Cromwell snapped, slamming her gavel. Her eyes were fixed on the documents in front of her. "I assure you, Your Honor," Mr. Powell said calmly, "the signatures, the trusts, the tax filings, they are all perfectly legal and valid. Mr. Barrington anticipated this very scenario. He knew his children's greed would not allow them to be content. He knew they would come for his wife, and he built a firewall to protect her. Their inheritance wasn't a gift. It was bait. And today they have taken it." The judge closed the folder with a decisive thud. She looked over her glasses, not at me, but directly at my children. Her expression was one of pure, undiluted contempt. The court sees no evidence whatsoever of incompetence on the part of Mrs. Barrington. In fact, it seems she is the only person in this family who understood the true nature of her husband's estate. This petition is not only denied, it is frivolous and malicious. Furthermore, I strongly advise the petitioners to consult with bankruptcy counsel immediately. This court has no jurisdiction over the financial storm you have just unleashed upon yourselves. She slammed the gavel again. Case dismissed. My children sat frozen, looking like marble statues. Their triumphant smiles had vanished, replaced by masks of pure, uncomprehending horror. I rose slowly, leaning on the table, my legs feeling steadier than they had in months. I looked across the aisle at them, at the ruins of their greed, and for the first time I allowed myself a small, steady smile. Let them laugh now, I thought. Let them laugh because their laughter had just cost them everything. The fallout was catastrophic, and it was immediate. It began not with a bang, but with the quiet, chilling efficiency of the financial system. Frozen bank account. Credit card declined. A notice of lien appearing in the mail. The glittering facade my children had built for themselves didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. Julian was the first to feel the full force of it. His new truck, the symbol of his triumph, was repossessed from his driveway in the middle of the night. His boat was seized at the marina. He stormed over to my house the next morning, his face red and blotchy, pounding on my front door and shouting my name. I watched him from the living room window, a silent observer to his self-destruction. He looked smaller without the armor of his arrogance, his rage deflating into pathetic, empty threats when no one answered the door. Eventually he drove off, his tires screeching, a sound of impotent fury. Isabel's unraveling was quieter, but perhaps more complete. The creditors started calling. The Florida vacation home, which she had bragged about endlessly, slipped into foreclosure before she'd even had a chance to furnish it. Her mansion, filled with soulless, expensive furniture, was put on the market for a fraction of what she paid. One afternoon I saw her car parked down the street from my house. She just sat in it for over an hour, her head buried in her hands. For a fleeting moment, the mother in me wanted to go to her, to offer some kind of comfort. But then Frederick's words from his journal returned to me, as clear as if he were whispering in my ear. They must reap what they sow. This was not my doing. This was the consequence of their own choices. The story spread through town like wildfire. The proud, wealthy Barrington children were not just broke. They were drowning in a sea of debt their own greed had created. Their laughter at the will reading had become the town's cautionary tale. Meanwhile, my life began to find a new, quiet rhythm. With Theodore by my side, I started to rebuild. We worked with Mr. Powell to consolidate the real assets, to secure the trusts, and to plan for the future. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about stewardship. It was about honoring the legacy Frederick had fought so hard to protect. Theodore told me his parents were tearing each other apart, each blaming the other for their downfall. Their marriage, built on a foundation of shared greed, couldn't withstand the pressure of shared failure. It was a sad, predictable end. One evening, several months later, there was a knock on the door. It was Isabel. She looked thin, worn, all the polish and shine stripped away. She told me she and her husband had separated, that Julian had left town, no one knew where. She had nothing. She didn't ask for money. She just asked for a meal. I let her in. I gave her soup and bread, and I let her sleep on the couch for one night. There was no grand reconciliation. There were no tears of forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal. I gave her what I could spare, mercy. But my trust, my love, that was something she had burned to the ground long ago. She was gone before sunrise, leaving behind only a folded blanket. A few days later, I sat with Mr. Powell and signed a new will. To my children, I left only a collection of old photo albums. A reminder of a time when we were a family, before their hearts had turned to stone. To my grandson Theodore I left everything else. The house, the trusts, the investments. The entire true legacy of Frederick Barrington. That night Theodore and I sat by the fireplace. The new will was tucked safely away. He was quiet for a long time before finally asking, "Why me, Grandma?" "All of it." I turned to him, this wonderful young man who had stood by me when the world turned its back. "Because you remembered that love is the only wealth that endures," I said simply. "Because when everyone else was grabbing for money, you reached for my hand. Your heart, Theodore, is the legacy your grandfather wanted to protect." His eyes glistened and he looked into the fire, the weight of it all settling onto his young shoulders. But it was a good weight. The weight of responsibility, of honor, of love. As I sat there watching the flames dance, I finally felt at peace. The war was over. The silence in the house was no longer the silence of grief, but the quiet comfort of a battle won and a future secured. My children had laughed at me, certain I was defeated. But I had endured. I had risen. And I had learned the final, most important lesson Frederick had left for me. A true legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave inside them. The story ends here, but the lessons remain. Sometimes justice comes not from revenge, but from allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the values we pass down and the love we leave behind.